Okay, rulers, settle down. Ruler School is brought to you by Odyssey Games, where you can go to get singles for all your Force of Will and other trading card games, as well as these amazing patrons. Special thanks to guest lecturer member Vite Ramen. Thank you for your support. Class is in session. Hey there, rulers, DMO73 here, bringing you the feature match for the week. I am playing a blue-violet list, which is this idea of we're not playing Bahamuts, we're not playing Turbulences, we're just going to loop Electos and have infinite resources with infinite Electos to kind of say, hey, you and I are both going to be top decking for the rest of the game. You're not going to be able to play cards, and I'm just going to grind you out. And Paul Clute is joining us on the left, playing his take on the Asmodeus Belial kind of combo Fiesta, where it's just like we put a bunch of different engines into the deck and played some really cool stuff. But the fact that we can play early will super effectively, get super aggressive with tokens, get super aggressive with things like Raise and Revive to steal stuff from the RFG, all kinds of stuff. So it should be an interesting match for sure. The blue-violet list is certainly more of a grindier take on violet. It takes a little bit to set up, but it's this idea of once we get started, there's really not much you can do because you're just not going to have cards for the rest of the game. So we'll see if I can pull it off. Blue-violet going to be on the draw here, which is not super great, but we do like the, the red energizes at least helpful to be able to be using the violet energy, violet effect on our opponent's turn if needed. See that first turn Erythropia come down, which lets him do the recharged God's Art. Down comes a Burning Rabbit Dash. So it gets 3 tokens out here. They're all going to be 3/3s. Gets pretty aggressive with these tokens, and then he can just, if he really wanted to, he could possibly do double God's Art right now. Unfortunately, it's not really enough for lethal because of it's only the 3 tokens. So like you could max, I mean, if he hits perfect, he could get lethal here, but we are just going to see the 1 God's Art from Asmodeus to get 6 cards RFG'd. So each of these guys are going to get 6 +1/+1 counters, and then bam, we have suddenly 36 damage coming at my face just off of these 3 tokens. So in comes the first 3, take the first 9, go down to and then go down to 22 from the first 2, and then in response to the last one, we're going to go ahead and use the Energize to use Violet's effect to pop Aegis and kill one of the tokens. So we get to survive a little bit. This is one of those situations, though, where if he had done God's Art, potentially just lethal, the second God's Art. We saw that from Stephen Jeswain at Mini, just kind of the aggressive start that this deck can bring to the table. Down comes that Heart to Heart on my side to start being able to use Violet more effectively, hoping to draw into stone removal here. We do see it to be able to pop with Dark Prominence to get the second token, which feels great. And then we pass the turn. So we've stabilized the bleeding a little bit, and we potentially have some ways to be able to interact during his turn despite being tapped out. So overall, an aggressive start, but we do have some kind of comeback. And the thing about the blue-violet list is it doesn't really care about its life total getting too low too much, because we are going to get the RFG filled a lot, and we play 4 copies of Healing Robot because of the way the deck works to be able to recycle. So as long as we can get the combo kind of established, we're not really too worried about our life total being too low. Gonna swing in here for another 9. I see that's fine. We'll go down to 13 and see what he has in store before we pop another Violet effect. It's kind of, we use Violet a lot more reactionally during our opponent's turn, and then if we get the opportunity, we're just going to drop. We're just going to heavily dig. Once we get the combo started, though, you're a lot more proactive with the Violet because you want to have no hand, Violet effect, draw, discard, force with Electos. So you get a lot more proactive and kind of don't get to use the atoms other than something like Everfrost to double trigger Electo more so. We did do Everfrost during his turn, and then we go to our turn, so we have a very full hand. We just need to see Wall of Terror and Electo to really get things moving. Calling that Dark Depths Stone. going to play our Tiny Violet here to grab Dark Prominence and Everfrost back. Although I think we might actually want to try to grab the Aegis in the Dark Prominence here. It's a matter of like card draw right now. If we're not going to pop off this turn, probably isn't super important, as opposed to having 2 ways to be able to shoot stuff. Ultimately, though, we do take the Everfrost and the Dark Prominence, and then immediately use the Dark Prominence with Violet to pop the token. So we've cleared the board. This is good. We do have access to Everfrost during next turn to be able to draw. We do have access to Wall of Terror here to be able to start giving barrier. So like we're really just 1 card away from being able to hit that combo and kind of establish ourselves. We're gonna get that Umir out of our hand by producing Will, just to have 1 fewer card in our hand right now, and get a card on the RFG for later. Unfortunately, no Electo to be able to play with the produced Will. Would have been great, would have put us in a really, really strong position, but ultimately did not happen. Passing the turn to Paul. Playing a card we haven't seen in a long time, Awakening of the Flame King here, to burn the board for 4 and cheat in a 3-cost Fire Resonator. So this is going to kill Tiny Violet, which is a little unfortunate, but it doesn't hurt our wall, thankfully. It survives, so we're 1 step away, and getting to play that Athena, everyone's favorite, Jeremy's favorite card, which the fact that he can put +1/+1 counters on it effectively with Asmodeus, a second recharged God's Art potentially, is pretty huge. We're going to go ahead and do a Violet effect to try to draw. The whole idea of this is to try to see if we can find that Electo, because if we could find Electo here, we could pitch our whole hand to be able to then like reanimate it and have some draw power. But we're in a pretty bad spot. Like we're recognizing that we probably just don't have a way to kill this, especially since she has flying, and we're so low on life. Paul deciding whether he wants to get aggressive or try to play something out first. Do see a Stone Call hits the 6 Sage's Stone. Are we going to see some floated Will in response or recover Asmodeus? I think floating the Will with Carlina makes more sense here. He only can cast that 1 card per turn, but there's a high probability of it being a doozy. I think he floats double black. And so now seeing that double black, we're going to go ahead and proactively crack the Erythropia to recharge our God's Arts. So now Asmodeus can get a lot bigger. And then down comes the Virgil to be able to finish things off. Being able to, he's done it. If he has access to God's Art, he can still have the Will. He has the 1 Will, 3 Will potentially available to be able to shoot with Virgil to kill the Wall of Terror, because it gets rid of barrier. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to do some last minute draw power here by pitching our hand, discarding essentially our whole hand, casting Voice from the Void for. So moving into game 2 here, hopefully see if we can set the combo up a little bit faster so that we don't get kind of blown out with the early aggression from this deck, and kind of show you exactly how it works in terms of being able to regain life and keep things controlled and set us both to that net 0 state. Seeing a pretty interesting keep opening hand here. We see the Magnus Guardian Beast. We see a Guardian of Amadeus. It looks like a Mimicking Beast, and also a Burning Rabbit Dash. So keeping some pretty interesting stuff here, choosing, trying to figure out what he wants to keep or what he wants to get rid of. That's the one thing about Asmodeus, is because it's 60 cards, based on how you build it, sometimes you just get a lot of weird hands. First turn Heart to Heart coming down here, quickly just cycling through with some Everfrost to be able to draw some cards. Feels pretty good to be able to have Heart to Heart ready on live on 1, so now we already have a way to freely start answering things if he tries to pop off too early. Do see a Scourge Bales off the top, so that's nice for us not having to deal with double God's Art on turn 1 potentially. Paul trying to decide exactly how much he wants to go in here. He knows he has to be a little bit fast. Like, the way you win this matchup is by putting on pressure, so blue-violet can't establish. But he does know that he's walking into a heart-to-hearted violet, so there's a very real chance of Dark Prominence. There's a very real chance of Aegis. Ultimately choosing to go for that Burning Rabbit dash. This would actually be a pretty cool situation to respond with Tachyon if we were playing it this way, to be able to say, hey, well, we'll copy your chant and we'll also have tokens, and then we don't have to worry about it. Certainly a card that I think can find its way into sideboards for Violet, not necessarily blue Violet, maybe the hard discard variants that we've seen before as kind of an update, something we're certainly kind of interested in maybe even playing for you here on the channel, seeing that kind of mid-range take. So we have that God Art here. Going to see a pretty similar follow-up from last time. We're going to take the damage from 2 of them. We do have the Aegis to pop the 3rd. So we go down to 22 and say that's fine. At least we don't have to deal with double God Art, and we'll kind of have the time to be able to reestablish, especially since we already have that heart-to-heart talk live, which is very, very nice. First, we're going to play down that Wall of Terror. This is so that anything we play later, we can kind of naturally protect. Second 6 Sage Stone here. We do have that nice ability to be able to pay for potentially an Electo. We just need to see an Electo in our opening hand. Choosing red here. Down comes that tiny Violet here, getting us those 2 Everfrosts back to hand. Really just needing to draw some cards here. Unfortunately, just not seeing too much of the early. Thankfully, we have a little bit of protection here. End of turn, discarding to clean up. We discard the Avenger of Asmodeus, which then gets shuffled back into the deck. Or, sorry, put on the bottom of the deck. This is in the blue-violet deck as a one-of, so that we don't deck out. That's the biggest piece of it. You're going to draw through your deck a lot. You're going to draw a lot of cards very, very quickly. A lot of your deck is going to exist in the graveyard and the RFG, but you don't want to kill yourself with the deck out. So Avenger of Asmodeus is our kind of like backup way to make sure that never happens. So we're matching them body-wise 2-2. You know, Tiny Violet can block one of the tokens. We are technically bigger. If we went down to null, we have Bane on the Wall of Terror. We have the ability to do 2 Violet activations, and we do have a full hand that Paul doesn't really know exactly what he might be walking into. Down comes that Virgil. Virgil coming down. It's a little bit of an aggressive start here. Trying to see if there's a way to kind of recycle, see if we can draw into something. Using the Violet effect, we did draw into an Electo, and so now we're going to try to start kind of controlling that board. So before Virgil's in play, and before we can start pinging stuff and doing other kinds of silly things, we're going to go ahead and say, using the Wall of Terror to kind of pitch our hand here, to kind of start really controlling things. So we're going to pitch to give stuff barrier before he can start pinging it. Now there goes the Electo. You see we have 1 Resonator engraved that's not Electo, 2 Resonators engraved that's not Electo, 3 Resonators engraved when we pitch that Healing Robot. So now we'll be able to grab the Electo and get it into play. We can RFG those 3. The Umir is nice because we can cast it from the RFG later, so it's kind of just like still in our hand. And we're still just going to keep pitching and kind of making all this stuff have, now that the Electro's in the field, we're going to just make it so that we have kind of some clarity there. Attempting to use the Violet effects, or the Tiny Violet effects. Remember, this is all still before the Virgil is on the field, so we have a lot of safety here. So the Everfrost is going to go on the chase. In response to the Everfrost, we're going to pitch Maribel to give Electo Barrier, and then if it's the last card in our hand, we can cast for free Voice from the Void, which will then let us draw a card, which will then trigger Electo. Electo will then kill a token, and then we can... the token has to shoot something else. It doesn't do enough damage. We're going to discard that wall. And we do something incorrect here. So we actually kind of hurt ourselves by putting the Voice of the Void in the graveyard. We're casting it from hand. So we actually missed one opportunity to be able to force a sack here, which would have also could have answered the Virgil. But then the Everfrost is going to draw us a card. And then we get to go with Null. He swings in with the Virgil. He's going to go ahead and do God's Art off of the Virgil. This is where having put the Voice of the Void in the graveyard instead of into the RFG would have been important, because we would have emptied our hand and forced him to banish the Virgil. And we were actually at a point where we could do that. Instead, we're going to take 1200 damage from the Virgil. Paul's going to gain a bunch of life. It does tap him out and waste one of the God's Arts now, which feels pretty good, especially since he's already used Asmodeus. And we have a lot of Resonators in the graveyard, so we're at a point where we're going to be able to start kind of recycling things pretty effectively here. We don't really mind RFGing things. We're going to try at the end of his turn to flash in the Electo, which is a little bit of a mistake, as you'll see here in just a second. We bring it in on to play during his turn. He still has the God Art Fallen active, so he's actually going to go ahead and burn his coin here to answer the Electo, because he's like, hey, you're about to draw a card for turn. I really don't want to deal with that either. So I'm just going to pick it now, go up to 7,000 life, and Paul actually in person said, I'm Amarius now. We just need to get another Resonator into the grave here to be able to kind of reestablish, which we can do very, very quickly. See, we do have that Voice in the Void here. We'll use Dark Prominence off of the Violet here to kill the Virgil, so that gets us nicely set up to be able to start getting Paul's hand ripped to shreds. We want his hand gone, but we need to make sure that everything in his graveyard or in his field is gone to be able to start doing that. Float some will with Violet here. And then Calling Stone. We're going to play that heart-to-heart talk from the Maribella. Sorry for the quick clip there. We're going to play the heart-to-heart talk there from the Maribella that isn't giving us our grip-free things. We're going to get to grab Healing Robot. That's going to put the rest of our graveyard back into, except for the Maribella that's giving us a discount. Gaining 2,400 life in the process, go back up to 32, which is a nice little retainment reset there. And suddenly we have a lot more stuff to be able to deal with Electo. Our hand is also completely empty at this point, meaning that next turn when we start doing things with the Electo, we can start forcing heavy discard. Oh, no, I do think we actually have... No, we do still have a couple cards in hand. But we have Violet, which is nice. And we also have a Voice from the Void, so we can really start doing some pretty silly things. We don't have a wall, which is a little unfortunate. That's the biggest kind of hit here. The other thing about the being able to RFG the Maribels with Electo is it naturally, as well as Umir's, is it naturally sets us up to be able to cast those later, because the Resonator side of Maribel lets us just do that. Now, because we don't have Wall of Ideas or Wall of Terror out, we don't have a way to get down to null super effectively. We do have that Dark Prominence in hand, so it serves us better to be patient and wait and see what Paul's going to do to take advantage of the Violet effect more, rather than just trying to use Violet to turbo us down to 0 cards. See, we have that Flame King Shout, which could get him the Flame King Shout, which could get him access to the Magnus Guardian Beast, because it is a Fire Resonator, and it would also serve to clear the board a little bit. It would just hit Electo and Healing Gimmick, though. It wouldn't kill the Maribel, which is not super great, and then he knows I can just bring the Electo back, so it might be he might be waiting for that to use it during my turn. Paul choosing to do something a little silly here for the sake of the channel. Playing the Wall of Terrors has a floating green will. is going to use the Wall of Terror to pitch an Avenger of Asmodeus, and then in response to the Avenger of Asmodeus trigger to try to go back to the bottom of the deck. We're going to see something pretty interesting here. He's going to use the green floating and 1 black to use Mimicking Beast from hand to remove the Avenger from the game and put essentially the Avenger's attack worth of +1/+1 counters onto the wall. So now this is a very, very large wall. Against certain decks that don't have banished effects, this is huge. This would be like, that wall is gigantic. Eventually it'll get to swing through. He can get barrier protected, all kinds of crazy stuff. He is unfortunately though playing against a deck that has banished effects. So during his turn, we're going to go ahead and try to use Dark Prominence. Then we're going to go to our turn and draw a card, just to kind of cycle through and kind of get some better stuff out of our hand. We know that the wall has barrier already, so it doesn't happen there. We did draw into a Wall of Terror, so now we have all the combo pieces to really start kind of going off here as the blue-violet list. Going to attempt to produce blue, and then because it's free, we're going to cast Voice from the Void from our hand. And then while that's still on the chase, we're going to cast the Voice from the Void from the RFG. So that's going to draw. We're going to get to force him to sacrifice a thing. Paul's saying, I got to figure out a way to somehow keep this wall alive. Flashes in the Black Witch, which gets banished, and then in response, before the other one still resolves, we have another Voice from the Void that we top deck, so that's going to get us to draw, and then still before that one, we're going to pitch to wall, so that this Voice from the Void from the Remnant is going to get to draw us a card and force a discard here. So you can see Paul's already down to like 1 card in hand, and we still have lots of will this turn to be able to play around with, which is one of the crazy things about Healing Robot in this deck. Voice from the Void is pretty nuts. We're going to go ahead and use that floating blue from the Electo to play from the Umir to play a second Electo. So now every card we draw is forcing 2 discards, is forcing 2 sacrifices. We're at a point where we're going to start to say, okay, now neither of us are going to have cards in our hand. I'm going to have a repeatable board state. Nothing is going to get to like stick on your side of the field outside of a Jade Ruler. Cruising some will, calling a stone, using that floating will to once again cast the Maribel Sincere Engineer that is not giving us the reduction in cost. We're going to grab a Tiny Violet. Reason for the Tiny Violet here is because we do have the ability to, we have those Everfrosts engraved, which feels really nice, which sets us up for some pretty interesting stuff. We do decide to go ahead and take the Dark Prominence as well. This is so that if he does decide to flip here, we're in a better position. And then we're just going to start poking in. There is a world for this Electo deck where you want to just be proactively discarding them every single turn. There's also a world where, because Carlina can only play 1 card per turn, it might be better to hold off on your resources. It's really kind of based on the scenario. The problem being that it's Asmodeus, so it's a 60-card deck, so we really don't know what's in there. But before recovery, I think what we're actually going to see is we're going to see some barrier protection, choosing to use the Dark Prominence now. And then using Tiny Violet's effect. No, using Big Violet's effect to draw, and then discards an Everfrost, which is going to then proc. And then before that, we'll give something else barrier, discarding another Engineer. We draw a card. They're both null. He has to discard 2 cards. Now ripping him down to literally just what's in his hand here as he goes to his turn. And we still have access to Maribel. And we have a card to give something barrier if we need to. Paul choosing to crack to recharge his God's Art proactively. And then because he has one in his RFG, he also can play a Sincere Engineer just to be able to get a healing robot himself and kind of recharge. So he does have that healing robot. Healing robot's going to get to put a bunch of stuff back in his graveyard, and then it's going to create a trigger because he has that Avenger in his RFG. So we're going to take advantage of that trigger. So we're going to let him gain the life back, and then we're just going to hard cast Void from hand, and go ahead and let him gain that life, and then just RFG it all again. Paul says, yep, that's fine. I don't really have any responses to any of that because of where we're at. I have no hand. There's nothing he could do to respond. So we're just saying, look, you did that, you gained some life, now it's all gone. I don't want to have to deal with that later. This also means that my Violet forces a sack on two things. We're going to go ahead and use Violet herself on his turn, which I drew a card. I have to finish resolving. We discard the Everfrost, which triggers. It forces him to discard 2 cards, or forces him to banish 2 entities. He's going to respond by sacking 1 to Asmodeus to get a couple more cards RFG'd. Ooh, hitting a Virgil there. And then I get to draw off the Everfrost, then draw for turn. And so, yeah, this is how this deck kind of operates. It's like, hey, I'm just going to chip you down to death. I'm going to call stone every turn. I don't really care about flipping Violet. Really just want to keep you off of the game and kind of slowly poke you to death. People think that Null doesn't have a win con. This is it. It's saying, look, we don't have any resources. Game's over. We're going to pitch and then bring out the 3rd Electo. Completely and wholly unnecessary. Greedy, I would put on my part to try to bring out a 3rd Electo. There's no point in time where having a 3rd Electo is really going to be super important, at least not right now. It would be better off for me to save that Electo for during his turn, to then say, look, I need to then put it out on your turn so that I can attack, and then it comes to my turn and we're not like wasting potential options. So we're going to swing in with 2 of the Electos, both of the Maribels, and the healing robot. We did flip over the Violet here just to give us another kind of like discard outlet, to be able to, like, if somehow for some reason the wall gets killed by like a flames or something like that. Another Maribella. Sincere Engineer gets us another healing robot, which is going to heal us anymore. The reason why this is kind of crazy is that it reloads all of those Voice from the Voids back into the grave, which is just draw for potentially free. So even more triggers, especially now that we've got Violet flipped. It's more ways for us to be able to not have to worry about Violet's front side effect. It also gives us ways to be able to buff up Violet potentially as the time goes on. Go ahead and say, you know what? I've got options for Voice from the Void to be able to draw. I know you're going to be able to draw stuff. Let's go ahead and pitch out the 3-drop Violet, give Violet swiftness, and swing in for 8, just to try to close this game out a little bit faster. So I make a little bit of a mistake here. I'm saying, this feels pretty good. I'm not going to really worry about it. I've seen kind of what the deck's going to do. I feel like I have some answers. Not really worried about what card you might want to play here. That was a mistake. We're going to see a play of a Fallen Angel of Black Tears. There really wasn't a reason for me to not just force the discard to not have to deal with it, and instead my board's going to get wiped. So he's going to apply a negative 12 here. What we're doing in response to the effect of the Fallen Angel is we're going to go ahead and use Tiny Violet to draw a discard, which then kills the Fallen Angel because of the Electo Force bandages, but it clears my board. Now that being said, during my turn, I'll be able to go ahead and replay those Electos. I don't want to do it right now because they're just going to immediately die, but what we're doing is we're setting up our graveyard here to be able to know how many Electos we can bring back and win. And we've also learned our lesson for next time. Saying, hey, we have a way to be able to bring back all 4 Electos. We have enough Resonators in grave, so that's going to work out great for us once we go to our next turn. So not going to play them right now, but my turn before draw, we're going to go ahead and reanimate all of those guys. Draw for turn, 4 null triggers. He doesn't have anything to discard or banish, but then we get to go into recovery. Now, the great thing is here, because the violet's already flipped, and we've lost our heart-to-heart talk because we went ahead and sent it to the grave, it really doesn't matter. We're paying 1 to draw a discard, which is fine. Like, we don't really need violet to be free at this point. So, once again, we're going to see we need to get a card into the graveyard, right? And we're trying to figure out exactly what we want to do here. We're going to go ahead and banish to produce blue so that we can cast a voice from the void to draw a card to force him to discard. Discards a Raise and Revive. This is pretty good. Raise and Revive had a lot of really good targets, specifically things like Virgil or Valentina or the Magda's Guardian Beast. That could really help to have brought him potentially back into this game. Call Stone hits that 6 Sage's Stone. Does decide to use the will from that to say, I'm going to just flip Carlina. Carlina can't take any damage from this Electos and can kind of start eating them, and you also can't force me to banish her, so I'm at least going to put something out of the field that you have to deal with. And any of your spot removal, namely things like Dark Prominence, also can't touch Carlina, so she feels pretty safe. We draw with Violet. Discarding the Beatrice's castle. Down comes the wall. We're going to pitch Avenger of Asmodeus, which goes to the bottom of the deck, keeping our hand empty. Now, Castle of Beatrice is nice here because now we can start repeating stuff. Repeating things like Healing Gimmick. Repeating things like Heart-to-Heart Talk. Repeating things like Tiny Violet. This is where the deck kind of starts to just never really run out of resources, which makes it feel very, very good. We're going to go ahead and hard cast this Umir from the RFG just to put an 8/8 body on there that can actually deal damage to the Carlina, but also just to kind of threaten board state a little bit more. Swing in with another Electo. He says that's fine, I'll take it. Go down to 43. Draws for turn. And then I should be paying 1 for this Violet. Don't know why I'm not. Doesn't matter. Force him to discard. I think maybe I missed the fact that my Heart-to-Heart Talk had been sent to grave and then removed, which is on me for sure. Keep track of all your static effects, people. It's a big lesson to learn. So we have this Carlina on field. We've got it staring down a board. Asmodeus is really tiny right now. He's got 4 +1/+1 counters on him, so he's a 6/6. Doesn't really do much here. Carlina herself, the problem is Carlina can't really afford to swing because he's on a life loss deficit, and there's so much damage being represented here on board. We're going to go ahead and use Castle of Beatrice to bring back that Allosaurus to my hand, which is another way the deck never really runs out of steam. You play the Allosaurus because your RFG gets so huge, you can grab whatever you want, be it a Heart-to-Heart Talk or another Healing Gimmick or Healing Robot, just whatever you need to be able to keep the engine kind of running. Down comes our own Virgil, because we are playing a single copy of that in the list, just to have kind of an end game hit here. Swinging in with 3 Electos. He goes to block. He says, that's fine, I'll take the 3 Electos. Oh, wait, no, you know what? I am going to block the 3rd. In response, we're going to go ahead and try to shoot it once. He says, that's fine. We're going to shoot it twice. He says, that's fine. And we only have 2 will left available. We could make him waste the Asmodeus God's Art here, but he does have Erythropia, so we say, you know what, that's fine. You can just let me trade, I'll just bring it back. And then I'll crash the Umir into it. So then Umir can kill it, and then we move on. This was mainly just to get the Carlina off board. Now we can kind of safely swing in with the rest of it. So another 4 there. Virgil himself gets to swing in for 10. There's nothing in his hand right now. You know, he has no cards in his hand. There's nothing in his graveyard that can hit with me. Both of his rulers are tapped. We're very, very comfortable here. And we have enough resonators in the grave that we can just bring back Electo. Now, the thing about Castle of Beatrice with Electo is because Electo removes things for cost, it gets around Castle of Beatrice. This is something that's important to recognize. Beatrice only prevents things that are being removed by the effect of, not by cost of. He draws, we use Violet, we hit an Everfrost, forces him to discard, we get to draw another card, and we say, okay, cool. We're threatening lethal next turn. We've got you completely cornered here. You don't have an ability to judgment. You don't have anything in your hand. You don't have anything in your grave that's helpful to you. Your Carlina is dead. You have no draw power. And we have Virgil. We don't get a God Art here, but Virgil himself is still like just representing that damage just from the will that we have available. Down comes the Asmodeus. Does have swiftness, but it's not going to be able to kill anything. It's just serving as a blocker at this point. Ultimately, though, this is going to just kind of seal in the game. It's just a matter of what actions I'm going to take to close things out. Chooses to pass the turn there. We draw our last card. Like you see, it's the bottom card of our deck. We knew that that was there. We're going to go ahead and proactively just discard the Avenger of Amadeus here to then get it to the graveyard to keep our deck full. Though in Force of Will, the only times that you would deck out is if you attempt to draw a card for the action of drawing for turn during your draw phase, and if you cannot because you're out of cards, then you lose. So Avenger of Amadeus helps us get around that. And we're going to go out in a little bit of a flashy way. It punished us in the early game, so we're going to kind of punish it back later. We're going to go ahead and float some will, awaken the Umir from the RFG, hard pay the 6 for the awakening to steal a resonator from his graveyard, and we are going to grab the Fallen Angel of Black Tears. This is going to apply a -12 to his board state, which is enough to be able to kill the Amadeus, or the Asmodeus, and then everything else can just swing in for lethal. Not the Fallen Angel and not the Umir, but everything else can swing in. It's 22 damage represented just by the Electos and the Virgils, and I still have will to be able to burn him. So that's the game 2, and now we move into game 3. So we're in game 3 now. We've seen the kind of grindiness that comes from the blue light list. It just needs to be able to set it up. It definitely can contend with what the Asmo combo deck is trying to put forward. We just have to see all those combo pieces. So now the trick is to see whether or not we can find it quickly enough in this game 3. Paul choosing to take the coin in this game 3, which makes a lot of sense. Having even more will robs me of being able to interrupt things on that first turn necessarily, especially if I don't see a heart-to-heart talk, but we'll see how it goes. There is some credence to the idea of in this matchup, because he can only cast 1 card per turn, maybe blue-violet going first is better anyway, because it gives us more setup time, like more turns before, more actions to take before he can take his first one. We'll have to see exactly how that plays out here in game 3. First stone, we hit a Hearth's Core. We do get to see that first turn heart-to-heart talk, which is a really good start. One thing about the blue-violet list is that it's not playing a single copy of Eternal Wind, because we're just not doing that kind of stuff. Down comes that first Electo, choosing not to use Violet's effect during this turn, it would seem. Ultimately just choosing to pass the turn. A little bit weird choice there from me. I think there's not a reason to always at least be just doing something with Violet every single turn. You don't have to discard it out of if you don't want it. First turn Erythropia, once again coming down from Paul. Certainly seems like we're going to see that Magnus Guardian Beast come down here. Do see a Virgil in that hand as well, but in the early game, Virgil's, in this particular situation, knowing that I have Violet live, playing a Virgil here doesn't seem super relevant. We can play it later. Magnus Guardian Piece coming down, going to get us a couple 1-drops. There's 60 cards in this deck, so there's a lot of different options. That Wall of Terror looking pretty smart for being able to protect anything from something like Dark Prominence or something else like that. Telling Paul before he goes ahead and gets his 1-drops, I'm not going to respond, but we are going to use Violet's effect before the actual search resolves to maybe try to kill it, because we're like, he might have a Well of Ideas. Let's see if we can do something. Ultimately, though, just discarding a Void just to cycle through here, not seeing that Dark Prominence that we wanted, so he's going to get to be able to get kind of anything he wants here and keep a full board state. With Asmodeus as God's Art, that's also going to be potentially 18 extra damage, which is pretty huge, especially if one of those cards he grabs is indeed Wall, and he can just protect it. Kind of weighing his options here, thinking about Wall or Dolly to bounce the Electo back to hand. Both would be relevant here. He can't really swing this turn, so I'm not really sure what the Dolly would produce for him other than potentially drawing a card. It doesn't generate a ton of advantage immediately, and I can just recast the Electo later or then discard it to grave, especially if I see a Wall in my hand. You can see as he filters through just all the unique cards. There was a Shakti in there, all the different kinds of deck cards that get played into a 60 card Asmodeus deck. We are going to go with Asmodeus's Demon and Wall of Terror. So we get to protect it, as well as this gives us double duty with the protection of Asmodeus's God's Art, because we put those +1/+1 counters on the Demon, and then suddenly you get, you know, even more life drain. Not only is it damage, but then later it becomes life drain, so you can kind of double the use of those God's Arts, especially since he has access to double God's Art with Aerothropia so early. You're going to remove 2 because of the answer effect of Asmodeus Demon. Ultimately choosing to pass the turn there. Not being too proactive with the God's Art, which makes a lot of sense just in case there's a board wipe or a multitude of sacking. If I can get to the combo this turn, he's in a spot where like all of this is going to die anyway, so it's probably not for the best for him to overcommit to the God's Art until he's ready to do something, or until I'm forcing him to do something so that he gets the maximum value off of it. Down comes a second Electo on my side. Using the effect of Violet to try to dig a little bit, just trying to see that Wall of Terror here. Voice from the Void getting discarded because it'll be useful later. Playing a heart-to-heart talk to draw. Still not seeing that Wall of Terror. So unfortunately, it's going to be just a couple Electos trying to save the day. With that in mind, knowing that all I have is the Electos for Bane, as well as the fact that he's already removed that Violet from the grave because of the Asmodeus Demon effect, we're going to see a proactive God's Art here. Does hit 6 uniques, so suddenly 18 more counters added to the board, and the ability to protect with whatever is in his hand. Stone Call from Asmodeus. Looks at his potential options here. Knowing the fact that he's got that Valentina in the RFG, it makes a lot of sense that we're going to go for this Raise and Revive play. The Electos are the only thing standing between him and lethal right now, so we're going to see a cracked Aerothropia for a second God's Art. It does hit 6 uniques again, so now suddenly all of them have 12 counters on them. Even the Wall of Terror is just an absolute body right now. And with so many cards in hand, he has the ability to protect whatever I might be trying to target, because the thing about Blue Violet is if I'm not comboing off, all of my removal is targeted. So he's in a really good spot here to be able to close out the game. Down comes that 1 spell per turn, Raise and Revive, to grab the Valentina, which will steal my Electos, thus clearing the board for him to be able to swing through. And we try it just in case, you know, knowing that he has it anyway, but we do not have any kind of way to get through the barrier removal. So Valentina is going to steal our Electos, and then he can swing through for lethal. So that is the games. Hope you guys enjoyed it. These were very fun decks to pilot. Deck profiles for both will be up later this week, and we'll be back next week with even more content. So thank you guys so much. Enjoy the video, and until next time, this is DMO73 saying class dismissed.